Okay. Can everyone see my screen? All right, so I'm going to be talking about the Mupun tribe. Mupun people are found in Plateau State. So Plateau State, as we all know, is home to over 40 ethno-linguistic groups and indigenous tribes. And Mupun happens to be one of these indigenous tribes. Mupun itself refers to both the kingdom and the language. And just like any other or most ethnic groups in Nigeria, most of our people move or migrate from the villages to the urban cities for better living. So our people are also the same. Our people are a united group that have lived for centuries without having communal clashes. We live basically in clans, like in groups, or you find families and segments like that in the villages. So the people live in communities, as I said, according to clans, and they're quite a hard-working group of people. Despite the rocky terrains, we have our people producing food for their families and also producing food that will be used for commercial purposes. The occupation. So economically, the Mupun people are predominantly farmers, which is normal with a lot of ethnic groups. And agriculture has been the primary occupation of the people. Other activities like blacksmithing, hunting, mining, weaving, and the others are just regarded as secondary occupations because they just do them for maybe just meeting basic needs and for fun. The Mupun people come from Panshin local government. They are found in the southern part of Panshin local government area of Plateau State, with Lankang as the headquarters. So our villages include Lankang, Lunchan, Jiblik, Abordis, Gyang, Kagu, Tambes, Sing, just to mention a few. Panshin is it relatively has cool temperatures with an average of about 22 degrees. That's the annual average, but it also can get as cold. It can be as cold as 6-7 degrees in December and January. That's how cold the place can be. It also has heavy rainfalls between late June and mid-August. The terrain is rocky. If you've been to Panshin, you will know we are from the rocks. It's rocky with steep hills and valleys, and it has an exceptionally green and beautiful vegetation also. We have common foods like the acha, which is more common or prominent with the Biron people, but we also farm acha, and acha is fonio, I think in English, but these are the main things that we have in the Mupun land. We have beans, we call it kwakil, then black olives. We make the olive oil, which can be used for cooking and medicinal purposes. We also have yam. The yam is, it's not the normal yam. There's a particular name for it. It's a little bit small, just like a handful. And it's cultivated mostly around our area. And we farm rice, guinea corn, millet, and some other things. And our favorite drink is the kunu, as usual, which is called the gruel. And it's either fermented or taken just the way it is. So the fermented is the, the alcohol kind of the gruel. We have several cultural dances also. We have about 1, 2, 6, and they are different because different people or different groups of people partake in that particular dance. We have those ones with the girls and the ladies. We have the one with the older men. young men, and like that. So they have different names and they're done differently. This is the Mupun attire. It's not very common because a lot of the people in the urban areas don't use it, but it's becoming now, it's now becoming popular because young people are beginning to see the need to just have a glance or have a look into what is happening in their ethnic groups. And I think it's a good one for we also as a Mupun group. We have several sociocultural activities which are common with other cultures, but the one which is most particular with the Mupun people is the Vuang Festival. That's the main festival, and it's done once in a year. And there's a very short clip that is going to tell you about the festival. It was documented by Dr. Patrick Dako, who also happens to be a Mupun. So this is just the bit I have to say about the Mupun culture and the Mupun people. So we are going to look at a short recap about the Wang Festival. So if you would allow me, I would just click on the video and thank you so much for listening. We'll go right ahead to the business of the day. I'm going to introduce our presenter, and after that, I'll introduce the discussant. So almost all of us are familiar with Dr. Barira. Dr. Barira Mohammed teaches history in the Department of History and International Studies at the Plateau State University, Bocos. She is also the Directorate of Research and Development. Barira is interested in social history, conflict studies, and gender studies. She received her PhD from the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. She has co-edited books and also has journal publications. Our discussant is a a guest to us. He is Dr. Henry Gyang. He is a lecturer with the Department of Military History, Military History at the Nigerian University, BU, Nigerian Army University, BU. He has a BA in History from the University of Jos, Nigeria, an MSc in African Studies from the University of Oxford, and an MA and a PhD in Military History from the Nigerian Defense Academy, Postgraduate School, Kaduna. He's married with children. You're welcome, Dr. Barira, and you're welcome, Dr. Henry Mang. So we'll take Dr. Barira right away. You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Sorry, please, is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay.
It's on now.
Okay. So sorry, I'm trying to, I'm here, I'm frozen here, so. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
The title of my presentation is Marketplaces, Identity and Political Conflicts on the Jos Plateau. The Jos Plateau is in the central Nigerian area. It covers 2,500 square miles. It has been settled by the humans since the early Stone Age. What is interesting also about this area is it has been engulfed in violent political conflict. Since 2001, the Jos Plateau has been engulfed in violent ethnic conflict, which has left many casualties in its wake. Over 1,000 people lost their lives in the 2001 conflict. From between 2008 to 2010, it was reported that about 2,000 people lost their lives, about 10,000 people were rendered homeless. It has generated a lot of interest, so many people have been interested in this area, a lot of scholarly discussions on the Jos Plateau. However, what I see that is lacking is a study of the spaces over which these conflicts are mostly enacted on, or this violence mostly enacted on. A lot of interpretations from ethnic to religious conflicts, basically the issues of identity. Am I frozen? Because I can't see myself.
Can you see your screen?
Oh, I can't.
Okay.
We can see you and
we can see you and we can see your screen.
Okay, I can. So I'm wondering if I am okay or not.
Okay. You're very okay.
Okay, so let me just go on. So I was talking about the conflict being leading to a lot of loss of lives and property, rendering a lot of people homeless. The major actors in this conflict are the indigenes, those who are described as the indigenes of the Jos Plateau. These are the Birom, Anaguta, and the Apizere. This group are mostly or largely Christians versus the Hausa Fulani people who are often described as outsiders to these areas. They are designated as settlers. They have a long history of migration from the northwestern Nigeria to the northeastern Nigeria. Like I stated earlier, this research is concerned about the connection, the nexus between marketplaces and the violent ethnic conflicts on the Jos Plateau. Like I stated, a lot of studies have been done over the Jos Plateau and different interpretations or causes of this conflict. But the sites over where these conflicts are enacted upon, or over which the material struggle of this conflict. Can we?
Sorry, Samuel Abdullahi, can you mute your microphone, please?
Dr. Barira, please, can you unmute yourself? Okay.
Okay, yes. So I said these deadly conflicts are between I'm going back again now. My research is about the nexus between marketplaces and the violent conflicts. To say that a lot of studies have on the Jos Plateau conflict abound. However, the spaces over which these material struggles are enacted upon are not studied. Kingsley Madikwe studied the spaces over which this conflict are enacted on. Well, what he didn't study is the material dimension of this struggle, which is what my study would be looking at. I am concerned with why is the market a place of commercial activity where people come to buy goods and services should be a place or a theater of violent conflict. On the Jos Plateau since 1999, a lot of markets have become theaters or epicenters of violent conflict. Garabiu market, the Katako market in Larento, Jos, the Jos ultra-modern market, which is also known as Terminus market, Bukuru market, Delimi spare part market. They've all been victims or epicenters of theaters of violence every time we have violence on the Jos Plateau. And my research is basically concerned with why these areas have become theaters of violence. My research, I will be looking at 3 of these marketplaces. The Katako market, which was burnt in 2008. I'll be looking at the Jos main market, also known as Terminus market, which also was burnt in the 2000 and sorry, it's a mistake. It's actually 2002. Anyway, I'll correct the slide. So it was born in the 1994 conflict, and then it was burned in the 2002 conflict. Then we have the Bukuru market, which also was burned in the 2010 conflict. So the Katako market was burned in November 28, 2008 market. This Katako market is the largest timber market in Jos. As the name implies, the Katako is a Hausa word for timber. But the market is not only a timber market, it is the largest second-hand market in Plateau State. And then it also sells foodstuff. Now, the timber market is largely dominated by the Igbo ethnic group. The second-hand market and the yam market also has a yam market as a food sections. So the yam market is also, the yam market as well as the second-hand market is dominated by the Hausa and Fulani people. And then other ethnic groups share in the other aspects, the other foodstuffs in the market. So during the 2008 conflict, this market was burnt down. The conflict was likely a political conflict over local government elections. It was reported that the Hausa people felt aggrieved with how Plasek was intending to rig the elections in favor of the indigents. And so that led to the violence that erupted in the state, which then spiraled into the market. According to the human rights report, it says that a group of violent or angry Christian mob raised down the market. And so that is a description of what happened. And during the Ajibola during the Ajibola Commission, the committee said that the market was burned by hoodlums. No one knows who burned the market to date. But there has been counter accusations by each group. The Hausa people accuse the Igbo, the indigents mostly, the indigenous Christians of burning down the market so as to diminish their economic stronghold in the state. The indigents also, alongside with the Igbo Yoruba people. Now, the question is, the Igbo people are also deemed as settlers in the Jos Plateau. So how do we have them alongside the indigents? Is the fact that based on the Hausa perception, they all have a common identity. That is the identity of Christianity. They're both Christians. And so we always have the changing dynamics of either ethnicity or religion when these identities come to fore in the narrative of the conflict. And so the Hausa people claim that the Igbo in collusion with the indigents also worked hard to ensure that they diminish their economic control. Meanwhile, the Igbo people said it was the Hausa people who started to burn the timber market. And so the belief is then the indigents went to burn the timber shade, the second-hand markets in retaliation. The Hausa people then also claim that the Igbo people were the one that burned the market in retaliation of the burning of the Dilimi Spear market, where the Igbos held sway. Moving forward, we then go to the terminus market. The terminus market, the just ultramodern market, or the terminus market that was burned during the April 12th, 1994 crisis. Then again in February 2000, I think a span of 10 years conflict. Also this market became an epicenter of violence, or another theater of violence, where the market was burned to the ground. Again, ethnic accusations as to who burnt the market. The Hausa people said this market was a symbol of Hausa economic powers, and so the indigents destroyed the market so as to undermine their economic foothold in the state. While the indigents, as you can see in my slide, will say that the Hausa people destroyed what is the pride of Plateau State. That so because of their anger and attempts to destroy the economy of Plateau, the Hausa people decided to destroy the market. Again, nothing, those who destroyed the markets based on reports are hoodlums, talking about criminality and not really assigning blame to any of the groups. So nobody has been actually caught and prosecuted for that. Then the final market I will be looking at is the Bukuru market in Jos South. I forgot to mention these other two markets I'm looking at is I looked at previously is these markets are located in Jos North. The Bukuru market in Jos South has also been a victim of conflict from 2008, then in 2010. This market was burned down in 2008, political violence in Jos, and then fast forward to 2010, it also became a victim of violence, where we had over 10,000 shops destroyed. The same accusations. So the indigents claim that this market was burned by the Hausa people because the market is located in what is defined as the enclave of the Hausa people. So the argument is that there is no way that indigents or other ethnic groups could have come to destroy that market or perpetuate this crime. It says it is. Another reason is that the shops that were destroyed were mainly those of the indigents and non-indigents, non-Hausa people. And so in the attempt to resuscitate their business, a Gyal market was established in Gyal, the epicenter or the enclave of the Biron people, just across Bukuru on the express road, just opposite it. So the indigents went and established a market. According to Adam Hegazi, the emergence of a rival market during this period, which is ethnic segregated rather. So we have a market that's purely based on identity, mostly the indigents of the Jos Plateau, then those who are Christians patronize this market. And so in retaliation to what is perceived as the Hausa behavior towards the indigents and the non-Hausa people in Bukuru market, the indigents as well as the non-indigents who were mostly Christians in solidarity began to patronize. They boycotted the Bukuru market and patronized the Gyal market. The site was given by the district head of Gyal. And so the Hausa people felt that the attempt to develop this market was an attempt to again undermine their economic power. The intervention of the state in the establishment of this Gyal market further exacerbated matters. The state decided then to give the Bukuru market notice where they were going to move the market from that site. And so the Hausa people saw this in what Wale Adebanwi will say vindictive cartography, to move the market to a site that is hostile as far as they're concerned, move it from their area in quote to another area which would be seen as hostile. The government trying to explain the scenario said, the secretary to the local government further said that the movement was based on security matters, was based on security issues to further protect people when there is an eruption in of conflict in that place, that the market is situated very close to residential areas. And so it's to avoid further complication of the same scenario that the state government is intervening. The Hausa people saw it as an attempt to emasculate them financially. Another movement, another support that the government gave to further create anxiety among the Hausa people is the fact that the girl market then became a daily market. Not only became a daily market, its market day became a Saturday, which is the same thing with the Bukuru market. And so the Hausa people saw this an attempt to replicate, a Bukuru market, and then break what is their monopoly. Because looking at it historically, the Hausa people have been preeminent in the area of trade from the colonial period to date. And so, Professor Mang has argued, that the Birom and the other ethnic groups have always seen themselves marginalized economically. They have never seen themselves, the ownership of those markets are located in their area. Now, resorting to what Adebanyi would call territoriality, to say that markets belong, can you mute that person, please? Yes, thank you. And so, our area, and so the markets are in our areas, and yet we do not have access to the power structure of the market, and the organization of the market, the hierarchy of the market. So they see themselves as being out of that, dominated by those who are deemed settlers. And so the narrative of marginality is very evident in the marketplace. And I argue that this is why a place that is supposed to be just simply a place of exchange is imbued with this tension and struggle over who controls that place. The market is a place of value. It is a place where wealth is accumulated. This is one of the reasons why I feel that I argue that we should put market at the center of studies over on conflicts in the area, because there you will understand the materiality of the struggle over that space. It's very, very evident when you see those who are struggling, because the market gives them the opportunity to accumulate wealth, much more than agriculture. It brings a bulk transaction of goods and money to the same place. And so market is very crucial to the struggles over identity. George Simmel talks that in arguing about conflicts or violence, say that people do not just kill each other for personal reasons. And so the causes over which people kill each other or die over is why we should search our lights or turn our searchlights to places like the market place, where the process of the production of that space, like I stated earlier, in terms of its organization, generates a lot of tension. The notions of indigeneity, the notion of sons of the soil, very evident in this market space, where the indigenes see this as an attempt, as an opportunity, yes, to turn around their economic fortune. And in turning around their economic fortune, they then see themselves becoming more economic, giving them access to economic domination of that space that they call their own. This, especially during after this or during the process of the SAP, Structural Adjustment Program, where people lost their jobs. And so these spaces became the avenues to which they are able to get their daily bread. Their daily survival was hinged on places like the market space. And so the incursion of the indigents to this place that the Hausa people have seen as their major domain over the years generated a tension. And then the tension where the people who would see themselves as the indigenous coming into this space, also attempting to overturn the dominant position of the Hausa people, is what is creating the conflict that we see in Jos today. It's not only in Jos, it's all over Nigeria and in Africa. And so I say there's a need for historians and people in the social science to look at these spaces over which material resources are produced. If you go to Kaduna State, for example, the Kaswang, the Zango Kata market has been burned. If you go to Lagos, the incidents in the Mile 12 market, or between the control of this market, between the Hausa people and the Lagos people. Everywhere you go to and you see the markets are burnt, it is always, the notion of sons of the soil is always employed to justify their actions. And so the market space is a very important space. It is very generative of conflict. What Henri Lefebvre talked about, that the production of spaces has always left to, the process of the production of these spaces has always led to conflict. And for the Jos Plateau, the production of these spaces of wealth, like the market space, is very generative of struggles over ownership and control. And this is at the core of most of the conflicts that we have today. I'll stop here and go further when we are discussing or asking questions. I can clarify.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Barira. We'll take on Dr. Henry Mang. Are you ready, Dr. Mang?
Yeah, I am. I don't know if you can see me.
Your video keeps going on and off.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how I can resolve that.
Okay. And Dr. Barira, can you share your screen now?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, but I am out. My thing is frozen. So I think I'll just go out of it and come back again.
Okay. All right.
So I think I'll start the discussion. Interestingly, Barira and I have very similar PhD thesis, and it was quite interesting when we discovered each other, and we did a lot of work together. The interesting thing is that her thesis has a more philosophical background with it. As a historian, I think in her school of thought, it's interesting. It interestingly brings in concepts and many different thoughts from different scholarships, which is quite different from most of the historical scholarship we have in Nigeria that is more classical. We tend to just acquire the historical information and the data and then try to interpret. With history outside Nigeria, most especially in Europe and in South Africa, the idea is to bring out certain philosophies that correlate in terms of the discourse. And that gave us two different work, but very similar, but different in approaches. And that's the impressive thing about scholarship, that you can have two different approaches looking at the same thing, but the perspectives quite vary. Interestingly, I have once talked with her about the issue, the big question here is not necessarily about whether the markets are being discussed or not. Very little has been discussed about markets in relation to conflict, not just in our case in Jos, but in a larger context. The market seems to be a very a silent thing within the discourse on conflict, because whether you realize it or not, you can't miss out in the market. My MSc dissertation was, can we meet in the market tomorrow? And that was a pertinent question. How do we meet after conflict? And the market has become more of a conclave. You meet there, you have the meetings there, you buy things together, Muslim, Christian, and all of that. And at the end of the day, when conflict arises, we try to determine how we can buy. She talked about girl market, and there was an interesting thing talking about Christian meat, in quote. The people of Gyang were insisting that you buy Christian meat. And Christian meat only meant that the meat was slaughtered by Christians. Not necessarily that it was, and maybe they added a little flavor in it by saying in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so it was a convenient way to approach the determination of food. There is a scholarship on it. Some scholars talked about gastro-nationalism. And the idea of gastro-nationalism is that food has its own identity. And so if food has its own identity, it's just like saying the Fulani own the cattle, and so the Fulani and the Hausa own meat. And all of these determinations, as Barira has pointed out, allow for people to hold on to a certain identity that they deal with in relation to activities in the market. It's undeniable that there is a strong Hausa presence in the economy, the informal economy of Jos. But then there is also the politics, as she says, of territoriality, as Adebawi will point out. And Adebawi and Obadari have an interesting discussion about the issue of encountering the Nigerian state, the new Nigerian state. 40, 50 years ago, most of these dynamics were not really present. Yes, there were conflicts in the market, just as in as early as the 1940s, there was conflict in Jos over access to the market space close to the railway. So it's not that it was inexistent, but basically there were certain definite rules that you could understand. Today, the marginality, it's not marginal anymore. Everybody determines a type of market he wants to create. And because of that, there's a tendency for conflict to erupt, because everybody's new determinism varies. So you say Christian meat, I say meat in general, and this in itself presents a big complication. And just as she pointed out, in all the markets, you see there are unique things. Katako market has an Igbo, Hausa, and other flavor. The terminus market was actually more or less cosmopolitan. And Bukuru would, because of the divisions between Bukuru and Geri, was a Birom and Hausa issue. And so you find that basically these determinisms work. But in all of them, you see there is that aspect of religion too, Christians and Muslims within the market. So there's always these identities that keep on popping up. But why is it that, I leave us with this question mainly, why is it that the issue of the market is always silent? Why is it that scholarship always feels that because it's an informal system, it doesn't need to be actually looked into as more or less the issues of the formal issues of, let's say, ethnicity, religion, and all of these other systems that work? So the informal system is actually is an area, is a variable that should actually be much more perused in. And I believe that it's important that scholarship, most especially, not just here in the Plateau, but in the larger scale, Nigeria and Africa, should look into the scholarship of informal spaces, not just markets themselves. I am presently doing a study on tin mining in Jos, and you would be surprised to find that the activities, these similar things that happen in the market also happen within the artisanal tin mining sites, or what they call illegal tin mining sites. And all of these are informal spaces, but these informal spaces open doors for new cases or new issues that arise in terms of conflict. And so scholarship now should look at informal spaces as basically informal commercial spaces as important routes by which research should be done. Thank you. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henry Mang. We have several questions in the chat box, and I don't know how you're going to respond to the questions. Would you prefer to read through the questions, or people should ask the questions themselves? Dr. Henry Mang and Dr. Barira?
I think
Yeah,
it would be
so,
better they ask the questions.
Okay,
but
yeah,
then you can, I think you should, before they ask questions, I think you should just go through the chat box, or should I read the questions?
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so the first question was from Dr. Mmadi. He said, do we say that the conflict in Jos, do we say that the conflict in Jos is between the indigenes and Hausa? How about non-indigenes like Igbos, like the Igbos? That's Dr. Nnadi.
Answer, Barira, will you go there?
yes, I'll answer. Like I stated for the Katako market in trying to explain the conflict in the Katako market, I try to show that there is the conflict is basically between the indigenes and the Hausa people. But however, these other non-indigenes who are other actors also come in terms of identity issues like Christianity, where they have a sense of solidarity. The Igbo people and these other non-Hausa people have been victims of conflict, basically. It is the struggle between the Hausa and indigenes, basically. But then they become drawn into the conflict as a result of their identity, and mostly this Christian identity. They see that Christian solidarity, that's one. There's also the economic dimension. The economic rivalry between the Hausa and the Igbo people, for example. Before now, during I want to trace that, like Henry Mang just mentioned, the 1945 potato market conflict between the Hausa and the Igbos. It was again over market, access and control of markets. And so where the Hausa people have seen Jos, or still see Jos, as part of the North, and so they view the Southerners as visitors or outsiders to the region. They see they have more reason, a close affiliation with Jos, because Jos is in the North, and so these Igbo people they see as outsiders. So the economic rivalry, the Hausa people came before. And so when the Igbo people came and then began to expand in the market and became a force to be reckoned with, that elicited rivalry between the Igbo and the Hausa people. So that is why most of the time also Igbo businesses are always targeted in this conflict. So I basically would say the conflict is mainly between the Hausa and the indigenes, but the Igbo people come in two dimensions. The other non-ethnic groups like the Igbo, the Yoruba people come because they see them as major contenders in the economic sphere.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Barira. Mibam is asking if there has been any kind of this marketplace conflict prior to 2001.
Sorry?
Yeah.
There has been any kind of this conflict, the marketplace conflict prior to 2001?
Yes, like I stated, in 1994, the terminus market was burned. There was Gadabu market, but tracing back to the colonial period. So basically, I'm looking at the markets in the post-colonial period. But if we want to trace a trajectory of how markets have become involved in the conflict, we can go to the first ethnic conflict in Nigeria, the potato market conflict. So this is the first conflict. and it started in the marketplace, and it spiraled into the other parts of Jos.
Okay, Israel dropped a comment. He said from public opinions, the Jos main market was destroyed because Jos Plateau was becoming a business hub of the north. And Mibam also said the burning of the main market was well planned. Some sources said bomb was used because blasts were heard before the market went into flames. So the assertion that hoodlums were responsible is not quite convincing. Nadi is asking, how do we handle the question, you or me? Oh, sorry. That was my personal question. Laundry is asking, is the ethnic configuration of the market a source of tension that leads to conflict? Is
Source
the
of what,
ethnic
sorry?
configuration of the market a source of tension that leads to conflict?
I don't know if I can talk on that.
Sure.
I don't think the ethnic configuration actually is the source of the conflict. But just as Barira has pointed out, there is a tendency for two things to happen. You have the Ademawi thesis of territorialism, where the indigenes would want to be territorial. But you have another aspect of economic territorialism where these ethnic groups, for instance, the rivalry between the Igbo and the Hausa in a market could be economic. It might not necessarily be ethnic. Now you have to understand that these dimensions are fluid. And so basically the 1945 riots were because of space, or that's the allegation, that it was basically a struggle for space within the market. And you can see that that is not necessarily an aspect of ethnicity or religion or identity or any of those forms of identities, but rather they have economic pursuits. And in the same way, you find that certain attempts, and that brings us to the statement of whether the main market was burnt by in a concerted manner or by hoodlums. I think it's not in our purview as historians to actually provide that without having evidence for that. But what we know for a fact is that it affected the economy. Everybody lost out in that. And so basically for one to say, okay, these people did it or those people did it or anything, it becomes more complicated because you cannot point of identity. There were Christians in the main market, there were indigenous in the main market. Even if non-indigenous were plenty, it was owned and revenue was collected for the main market. And as Barira pointed out, it becomes so complicated, you cannot actually point out to say, okay, the ethnic composition determined it. And the normal thing in the market is that a Biron woman can ask a Hausa man for change if their stores are with each other. The rivalries or these other larger rhetorics come when the conflict itself arrives. But while people are doing business, everybody is looking out for economic advantage.
All right, thank you.
To further express that thing is to say that, but in looking out for economic advantage, and this is where the issues are, where then ethnicity, the issue of identity is employed or mobilized to gain this advantage.
Yeah, it's usually common to actually mobilize based on ethnicity to take advantage. But when you look at it from the base, having access to the place might be just primarily economic. So basically, ethnicity or religion comes in as a facade in order to access the economic space. What do you think?
Yes, yes, but then the issue of like I said, Adebawu would say, to justify that attempt to maintain or gain power in that space. So you are able to, the Igbo man cannot use the issue of territoriality to demand that access. But the indigene will definitely use that to say, this is our area. So the notion of sons of the soil is always employed or mobilized to justify the access to that space.
Yeah, it's usually a convenient thing to use the term sons of the soil, but in many cases, the sons of the soil themselves find it only convenient when they have access, but not the prowess. Because in many cases, when the businesses are handed to them, it doesn't seem to be as effective as it is with those who have already passed through a longer process of history of it. And that's why the guilds and all of these other or niche markets that exist in many places. I did a study on meat, and it's very difficult to have butchers that are not Hausa being successful as butchers. And one of the arguments I made was that girl market was primarily the advantage of the butchers, because, as I said, the butchers christened the meat in girl as Christian meat. And so it was a very convenient thing to tell Christians to buy meat from Christians and not to buy meat from Muslims. And so when you Christian and all of these, also you see it's the agency of religion or ethnicity, but not necessarily that it's not an economic pursuit. So you gain economic advantage by using these identities, other identities, to your convenience.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Barira and Mang. Israel is asking again, would the study be underpinned to a theory? If yes, what theory?
I'm a classical historian. I don't do theories.
Okay.
So yes, I was just going to say that the academy concerned with theory, it's a whole problem. And so in trying to discuss social issues, we must not necessarily underpin it with theories.
All right. All right. Yeah. Thank you. Musa Gugu is asking, although you will still go further in the discussion, but have this work suggested ways on how the marketplace, specifically on the Jos Plateau, can be utilized to bring unity to the warring communities, sorry.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, this is not basically a policy paper. So I'm not providing solutions to the issues of conflicts on the Jos Plateau. Rather, I am studying spaces over which these conflicts take place. So I don't think at this point I can provide any solution to, I leave that to those in peace and conflict studies.
Is anyone going to help us answer the question?
Don't leave that to peace and conflict studies. I think Barira is being modest here in terms of not finding solution. Part of her PhD, which I've read, discussed the market women in Bokos. And in her discussion about market women in Bokos, she was able to provide an idea of how women could bring about an organized system of trade within a market and provide for itself a restriction. And so I think the market, the instrumentation of the market, yes, I know it's not within our purview. Most historical research is not about trying to find solutions. I think the social scientists are more adept to that. But I think in most historical research, the reflections that are brought out, most especially when it comes to like issues of conflict, is for one to be forewarned about the possibility of it recurring. And one of the things that you discover in most especially when it comes to conflict in Plateau is that basically some conflicts seem to repeat themselves. Katako market, for instance, now has a frequency of burning. And you ask why. So it's not a question of us discussing policy. It's a question about us asking more questions. And I think that's the most pertinent thing. We leave these questions for government and for people within the systems to discuss as policy and as interventions, as the case may be.
All right, thank you. We have a number of questions here, and it's time already, and I don't really go ahead and the next 10 minutes.
Questions. Yes,
Sorry?
can I try and answer some? I can see the questions. I'm in the chat section. I can see some of these questions. So let me just try and answer a little.
Right, and Dr. Henry too, you could just look at the questions and see the ones you could pick. So we can add like 10 more minutes and it will be good. Thank you.
Okay, so let me take Chris Gonsu's question, which says that he does not think the conflict is basically between indigents because the Igbo shops were burned. They are also victims of this conflict. Yes, like I said, this conflict basically, the causes over which people do things, it's basically, it's not just for sentiments, basically has, what my argument is, has an economic undertone. And so the Igbos who are also victims of this conflict have a similar identity with the indigents. This is my argument. So this identity has to do with the Christian identity. And so when it looked on the prism of religion, the dichotomy between an indigent and a non-indigent is blurred. And so Igbos are always subsumed under that identity. So the Christian shops are destroyed. So it's always either or ethnicity or religious conflict. And so you see ethno-religious conflicts. There's always that dimension. There's the intersection between these two identities. And so that's why Igbos are also victims. And like I stated earlier, also there is the economic rivalry between these two groups. Dr. Andrew, Father Andrew talked about the issue of ethnicity or any other label. And he's saying that to add to the discussion, ethnicity or any other label per se are not often the causes of this conflict. Yes, and they are always mobilized to justify or to support. I agree with his comments. And somebody was asking if particular markets belong to particular people. I would say that the argument of there's what they call the politics of location. It formed part of my study, where people see markets in their places. And this is where Adebanwi's discussion of the notion of territoriality, where like the building material market, the people see that market as their market. It's in their territory. And so the struggle to control, and see the control is one over the market has hierarchy. And so who controls the market controls the valuation in the market, controls the prices, controls the conduct of the market. And so sometimes this struggle is over who then controls the market. And the notion of territoriality is often employed or deployed to control those markets.
Yeah, I think going to this question, I think it's Kezia, right? Kezia Litlow's question about the markets belonging to somebody. I did, part of my PhD study was concerning Yelwashan Dam too. And I discovered there's a relationship between the events in Yelwashan Dam and how it complements, and that of Gel and Bukuru. The fact that the markets themselves were partitioned based on certain instruments of identity. But in all of this, you know that basically it just shows, when you talk about the Adebanwi issue of territorialism, it just shows that people use these identities as instruments. It's all about access to the commercial space. The commercial space is the most important win for all of them. But how do you access the commercial space? In Russia, is quite interesting because the arguments between the various groups obviously shows, while one group argues about it having the economic advantage or the economic power, the other group argues about owning the land, and that's where the issue of the geolocation of the markets, where is it located, and to whose advantage is it? So in many cases, yes, people can identify with a market and call it their own, but in many cases, most markets are instrumentalized by the commercial activities that take place in them. So a lot of times you find that, okay, as much as possible, we can call a market a bureau market. But let's say about 40–50% of the people are not necessarily bureau, but they might identify, like in the case of Gel, as Christians, and not necessarily about the ethnic group. And so the identity as Christians allows for them to work together to the detriment of those they see as the others. And the same thing, vice versa, when it comes to all of this. So I believe, yes, identity comes in, but I don't think it holds as a hard and fast rule, because even the identities themselves are fluid.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. I know our time is almost up, and a lot of people want to ask questions and just discuss generally. So I would will not strategicate the thing for people to just, so anybody that wants to ask question can raise his hand and unmute and ask questions and just discuss, lend his voice or her voice to the discussion. But I just want to have a quick announcement so that when people want to leave, they can leave in between. So thank you very much for all of us that came. We will be having two webinars perhaps within the month on publishing particularly. We'll have Professor GK talk to us about publish or perish, discuss on the ethical production and disposition of knowledge. And we'll also be looking at a psychologist talk to us on academic stress, maintaining balance in productivity. So I know these topics are going to be of interest to most of us. We're going to send out the dates as they approach. So at this time, I think we can open up the discussion to, if you want to ask questions, you can ask. If you want to lend your voice to the discussion, you can unmute your mic and talk so that we'll have a much more robust discussion. Thank you, everyone.
And also to add, to make it a bit orderly, you can just click the raise hand button if you look at the reaction, so that we don't have another marketplace. Just raise your hand and then I can call on you to ask your question. Thank you. All right, so all right, Yakubu Mwanda, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, good afternoon, the panelists there and the presenters. That was a job well done there. Please, I would like to throw some light on the marketplace as it has earlier been discussed, citing an example with the girl market. The fact remains that the establishment of that girl market was as a result of a conflict that started from the Bukuru market. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a need for the establishment of the girl market. And I want to draw our attention to the fact that the Bukuru market conflict was as a result of some traders in that market who didn't want to abide by the laid down rules of the authorities that be, for example, the local government authorities that are controlling, such markets. So I think one other area that needs to be looked at in this kind of discourse is how because if you look at this whole scenario, one thing that keeps reoccurring is impunity, how people violate laid down rules and seem to get away with them with impunity. So I think by and large, if the authorities that be will learn to put measures in place to make sure that law and order is being respected and is being, heeded to, I think to go a long way in restoring, sanity and peace in our marketplaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yakubu. We have Gonsul Rigak. Can you unmute yourself?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Well, let me just reemphasize the point I raised in my question earlier on. And I want to commend Barira and Dr. Mang for their presentation today. My point remains that, in my opinion, the crisis in Jos and in the various marketplaces is not entirely, or in fact, I see a very little connection between the ethnic groups here on the plateau and the crisis, as it were. Because one, if you look at the configuration of the markets in almost all the places that Dr. Barira highlighted, you'll find that in Katako market, there are very few Plateau people who are doing business there. If you go to the Gonjo market, very few Plateau people. In all the marketplaces, I think that what is at play is actually the influence of the majority, the so-called majority tribes, over the influence that they have over our the local population here, as we are generally called minorities. So I think that for the Igbos, Yorubas, and the Hausas, where they find it convenient to attach themselves to either of the religions, they quickly do that to exploit on our fault lines of ethnicity. So my thinking is that the majority tribes are always having their way by projecting themselves as either Christians or Muslims where it's convenient for them to do. A case in point is, for instance, if you find the population in the building material market, I can assure you that apart from those Birom people, or let me use the word Plateau people who are doing businesses in the building material market, there is an overwhelming population of Igbo people who are in the actual business of dealing with building materials. And so also even in the Bukuru market, you find that there are very few Plateau people, apart from those who are into petty business of selling foodstuff, etc., etc. There are you hardly find a Plateau person doing any of those businesses. So I think that what is happening is that the majority tribes are influencing or using us to further actualize their commercial goals and objectives. Thank you.
Sorry, let me just say this. Longji, I think I get a sense of where you're trying to go, but there is a bigger thing about this than just about majority minority. There's a paper I once wrote, and one of the arguments is that there are times in which the minorities become a majority. Now, whether you like it or not, the minorities in Plateau are a majority with these majorities.
Okay.
And so we can't just say, okay, we're folding our arms and saying, okay, they are the majority and they are taking over. No, it's about niches. These groups, the Igbos, the Hausa, the Yorubas, have over time built niche commercial spaces. So you find out that the building materials market you're talking about is composed of Igbo, not because the Igbos just collected it. They built a niche around the commercial activity there. Now, if, for instance, a Biron man was interested in trying to build his own niche, he would have also joined in it, learned the trade the way the Igbos are learning. But you can as much as possible, you can drag the horse to the river, but you cannot force it to drink. And this is the problem. It's about, at the end, communities or people realizing that the whole city has grown without them. So you have the indigenous, yes, they are the majority, but in many cases, the commercial spaces are not in their hands. And so what do? They begin to assert their own position as territorialists, as owners of the land, in order to gain access to the space. And this is quite interesting, but over time, and I think Barira will identify that with me, there have been, before 2001, you will not see women going about selling fruits or putting tables with fruits. But after the crisis in 2001, people started joining in the commercial trend. Women would set tables and sell fruits, just as the Hausa men would do, and some other things. So it's basically about people realizing that, well, people have moved on without them. And so, yes, as much as possible, we'll say these groups have dominated, but it's not their fault in dominating. But what the other groups are trying to do is trying to access these spaces using the agency of their own identities, using the agency of owners of the land. So that is something I agree with you. There is, but it might be our perception that okay, these people have dominated, but they were there. They have built it over time. You don't just tell them, okay, get away from here. We're the owners of the land.
So to let me just further explain. To the daily visitor to the market, he does not understand the tension and the struggles in the market space. And so for you, will think that there's nothing happening. At the present, there's a little study I'm doing between the struggle between the Biron people who have also entered into the building material trade. They're also selling wood. Now the building material market association has been further polarized into two: the indigenous section and Igbo section. And so what my discussion is control to reconfigure economic spaces on the Jos Plateau is what is leading to tension. Reconfigure geographies of power. To say that one of the instruments or institutions where this conflict takes place is market associations. Who then controls the market association? This is a discussion for another day. But do not just assume that the indigenous are non-existent in these spaces. They are, and it is their attempt to new actors, imagine as new actors. That is the argument, that they are becoming new actors in an area formerly dominated by these major actors. It is what is leading to the tension and to the conflict.
Thank you, Dr. Barira and Henry. We have Moses, Mubam, and Nadi. So take you in this sequence. Moses first, Mubam, and then Dr. Nadi, please.
Thank you very much for such an enriching presentation. Now, the few thoughts that are just running through my mind while listening to your presentation, particularly Dr. Barira, is the fact that you focused your studies on the markets, and you looked at the markets within Jos and Bukru Metropolis, and of specific interest, you talked about the Gale market. So I was just wondering, I was going to ask the question because I am aware that there are additional markets or extra markets similar to the Gale markets that were established after the Jos crisis within the Hausa-dominated areas, outside of the terminus area. Perhaps you'll be interested in exploring those areas to look at the economy of the configurations of this area. I remember one time I was on a bike going to British America, and then we passed through the Angwarukoba area. There's a little link there that goes out to the Rikos area. And I discovered there was a large abattoir market there, particularly dominated by the House of Lani. I don't know if you are aware of that establishment. So in as much as you search, you do your searchlight or your research light on the Gale market, which is very good in your findings, can you also consider markets such as that abattoir market within the Angwarukoba areas? That may be of help. And secondly, I was going to, the comments that Dr. Mang mentioned in regards to the dominations of the market within a particular ethnic group. I quite understand the angle that Dr. Gonsum was trying to point out regarding the issue of who dominates the market and how are the markets accessed. And I quite appreciate the response that Dr. Mang presents, particularly that particular ethnic group, the Igbos, who using the building materials market as an example, you pointed the fact that this particular ethnic group have been in the business for long. They have the knowledge, they have the connections and all of that. I know this is an academic exercise. I wouldn't want to reduce the discussions to hearsays and perceptions and all of that, but it would be also good, perhaps, to look at maybe undertake a research on the experiences of indigenes who have, for a while, ventured into such markets and what their experiences have been. Again, I said this is an academic exercise, and it will not be good to reduce it to basic hearsay, but I'm fully aware of indigents who have ventured into the building materials business, and their experiences have not been palatable because, like Dr. Mang rightly mentioned, if you like, how this ethnic groups who have dominated the market have created a niche for themselves, have so created the connections, and therefore block out access or block out or sort of fizzle out others who are perceived not to be within that ethnic group in actually succeeding within the business in question. So I thought I would bring this out. Perhaps you want to take a look at that, and that may be of help to the academic community to understand what the experiences of locals within these businesses that have hitherto been understood to be an exclusive sort of right of a particular ethnic group. Thank you.
Okay, can I respond a bit to you? To say that, like Henry said, markets are niches. And so people create niches for themselves. The market is a very organized space. People just cannot come in. Everyone can come to buy, but not everyone can come to sell. So the market is governed by certain rules and regulations. And this is why people fight over access to power in the market, because then they determine the rules and the regulations of the market. And so if this particular ethnic group are dominant in the market and hold onto the power structure of the market, then they can attempt to exclude. So this is why I say there's a need to study the market, because the market is a medium where people exclude based on identity and whatever causes. People are excluded in these markets, and these issues of exclusion and inclusion, of dominance and marginality, all of these concepts are very evident in the market space. And so people use their niche to block out new entrants, to maintain dominance. And it's a very economic thing. The only thing about it here is the fact that people will use identity to then justify their inclusion or exclusion. But in every economic sphere, competition is very evident, and all competitors will try to exclude their competitors, take them out of business. Yes.
It's always a common thing for people who seem to feel protected within a niche, not to allow others from outside to come in. We are always afraid, because if these others come in, they have advantages. I pointed out about the issue of Gyang, where people were saying, come and buy Christian meat. Now, the thing is that if the butchers are successful, then every Christian will now turn to them, destroying the business of the others. And this is always trying to create a niche, trying to argue for the protection of yours, because you don't know how this other person, if you allow him to come in, will grow his own business that will destroy yours. And so in many cases, most of these people want to protect themselves. In building materials, and I think Dr. Barira pointed out the fact that she's doing a new study on the timber market in building materials. I am aware that there are people coming into the timber market, but I've not really done a study on that. And since she's picking it, it also shows us what you are saying, what the doctor is saying about the fact that these are new areas that we will have to go in. There's a lot to do about the markets. As we said, it's fallow ground. It's not been explored much in terms of academic studies, both within history or the social sciences. Most of what we are doing is novel. We are just starting a new area of study. And so basically, we would encourage people to look into it, not just necessarily within the discipline of history, but even sociology, anthropology, and political science. These are things that one could actually open a door towards.
Can I make a point here? Can I say something?
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
So I thought I'm supposed to be the one to comment, but
well, let's give Prof that privilege, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Prof. We can hear you, Prof. We can hear you.
Yeah, I thank Barira and Henry for their very extensive discussion of markets. I think there are certain presumptions here which the two of them might need to look at, which is the theory of the market. And you wanted to run away from the market theory. The market is a very highly theorized space. So it's a perfect market. But the market actually is, if you read Bauer's book on this kind of thing, you will know that you are not dealing with a very, very perfect space. You are dealing with very difficult situations. So the end of the perfect market might be the cause of what you are seeing. Where the market fails to observe the principles of perfection, and you have ethnic monopolies, you have ethnic oligopolies, then the space becomes constrained. It is unlike in Europe, where anyone subject to the business rules set by government is allowed to enter. So I think you need to really consider the possibility of theorizing your issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. But that will be a very difficult task, but I think you're giving us that challenge.
Okay. Okay. Teplon, can I go ahead?
Sorry for that intervention.
Hello?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to comment. I want to commend the effort of the Research Directorate of Plateau State University, Bokos, for coming up with such a laudable, idea. And I also want to comment this way, from my own background as a social scientist, economics, particularly, I think, the conflict in the marketplace has a lot, to do with economic issues, considering the Plateau man, for instance, we're actually known as, the civil service state, where people go to school after graduation. The main idea was, to gain employment, in a government institution or a formal institution, work there, become pensionable, and live the rest of your life. But the current realities on ground now is that the workspace is shrinking. We have more graduates on ground, but there are less, a number of, employment opportunities. And of course, the factor of who comes in. So therefore, the Plateau man has realized that it is pertinent for him to also participate, in economic activities in the market space in order to cash in, from what is being reaped in there, especially by those who are considered to be, outsiders, people from other places, so that is a fundamental thing we can, look at. So I wanted, talking about it, extensively, but I think from the comment, Barira made the comment, and law, or there's no that exclude any other person, from going into the market. Anybody can go into the market, because, a market is supposed to have free entry and free exit. So a Plateau man, being it a Gumai man, a gas man, a bureau man, can go into the market. But what is causing this conflict is mostly, the cartel that has been formed by those that are already there. Like Dr. Henry said, that they have been there for a very long period of time. Quite okay. But if you look at it historically, they started from somewhere. So there's nothing that stops the Plateau man. There's nothing that stops the Plateau man from, sorry, excuse me. Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear. We can hear you.
Okay, a call is coming through my phone. So let me just submit this way. There's nothing that stops the Plateau man from participating in business activities, especially considering the changing dynamics of economic relationship in present-day Nigeria, where government employment or white-collar jobs seem to be, drastically reducing, and the number of people, who are,
We are losing.
Sorry,
are increasing. So not just yes. Yeah, so it's not just for the Hausa or Fulani ethnic group, but even the Igbo people too, and the Yorubas. who are the major businessmen in the state. So I think that can be looked at. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Sorry, Bibam, I just want to buttress the point. There's an interesting thing you said, and I think that also links us to what Professor Fashak just said now about theorizing the market. Yes, it is important, and it's a legitimate right for Plateau indigents to say we want to go into the market. But where is the room for innovation? You can't just join into the market because somebody wants to sell shoes or somebody is selling wood. You join into what makes yours unique? What niche are you creating to bring in a different side to the market? And as Professor Fachak said, maybe these are the areas where theories, and I think Barira and I will have to discuss this further. Maybe these are areas where theories will be brought out. Are there, you can't go into a market that's already saturated and feel you have a right to. That's what leads to conflict. Because once the market is already saturated, you can't come with your ethnic jingoism to insist that you want a share in it. But you could come with innovation. What new ideas can we, or can the Plateau indigent and others use to access this same market? And these are the things that theories and new perspectives will have to come in with. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes you need to get into the market, understand the market very well, study, know where the gaps exist, and then you bring about your own innovation. So I think a lot of young individuals that I know are doing that, coming into the market with a lot of innovations. But I tell you one thing, that those that are already there ahead of them, try to use a kind of monopoly sense, to frustrate them, out of the market. Thank you.
Just to explain to you how markets operate, like I said, you can enter into the market to buy, but there's no freedom to sell. There are rules and regulations. And sometimes these rules and regulations are very stringent. So when you go to the market space, you will have to do a kind of apprenticeship. So when you come to do that, you must understudy someone. And sometimes it takes you 3, 4, 5, 6 years to be able to do that if you want to be a major thing. So there are fees that are put to allow you to come in as a major, except you want to be in the periphery. And so if you want to be a major dealer, there are certain rules and regulations. And these are the ways that they use to put you out of the market. And so you cannot just overnight, again, build a niche. These people have been there. Now, I want to give you an example of building material market. So during the conflict, in one of my study, during my PhD, I found out that the Hausa people agreed with the major Hausa people who are in Lagos, who are the ones that sell the vegetables. They agreed to boycott the building material market, and nobody bought the birom potato or cabbage. They cannot carry their cabbage as it is to just Lagos and just enter the market and sell it. It is those who are registered in Lagos market that can sell. And so they had to start looking for the Hausa people to negotiate with them. So the market is not as, like Professor Faksha said, it's not as perfect as we see it. There are a lot of imperfection, especially the African market is very dynamic. It's not like the markets you see abroad where they are, the principles of the market are very different here. They are based on niches and cultural ties.
Thank you, Dr. Barira. We have Nadi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Barira and Dr. Mang, for that interesting talk. Also,
Dr. Nadi, we have lost you. Dr. Obida, can we hear you? Have unmuted you. Dr. Obida.
All right, can I talk now?
Yes, please.
All right. In the comment section, I asked a question. why is it that these particular
As the issue of market is
kind
going
of
on,
conflicts?
Okay, I think Nadi is
Frida.
having a problem with his network.
Yeah, and he just came. Oh, Frida, please carry on.
All right. As I said earlier, I initially asked the question, but none of them gave attention to my question. When they were presenting and then the discussion came up subsequently, I was wondering, why is it that this particular kind of conflicts have subsided in Jos? Is it as a result of the establishment of alternative marketplaces? So I thought that because everything that is happening now will be history too, even in the marketplaces, now that we have peace. So why is it that these particular kind of conflicts have subsided now in Jos? Is a question that I'm asking.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, let me answer you. Now, like I said, these markets become theaters of conflict. They necessarily do not start from the market. They sometimes start outside the market. But the grievance and the tension that exists sometimes are looking for avenues where they can be expressed. And so, except we then have another conflict and you see that the market is not affected, then we can say maybe some of these things have subsided because of the emergence of new markets. But the reality is that the existence of these old markets where these competitions are very rift, there is still that tension. For example, the Faringana market that I studied showed that there's a lot of tension between the Hausa people and the non-Indians who feel very excluded out of the market structure. And so when you look at the structure of the market in terms of the market association, you see that they looked for some, ceremonial position, 2 positions, and gave to the indigenous so as to make them look like they are part of it. And they are complaining seriously about that. And so sometimes these conflicts that have erupted over the examples I have given you, they're always political conflicts, religious conflicts that have erupted in the state that has spiraled into the market. The market then becomes another theater of this conflict. That means these tensions are just waiting for the opportunity to explode. This is my thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Barira. For Obiora, you raised your hand earlier on. Do you still want to ask a question?
Yeah, it's not actually a question. I want to thank the discussants for what they said. But I think something is happening already in Nigeria, and especially in the marketplaces. And we are being faced with a kind of a marketplace that is not structured like the one we used to know. And that is the online markets, that may be one of the reasons why what Obida is saying is, people are, maybe a few years ago when there was a conflict between Hausa and the indigenes and they refused to buy their vegetables. If it is now, the indigenes may not have to worry, because I know of some people I know online, they send potatoes, they send strawberries to Lagos, to everywhere, and you don't need any formal market to do that. So if people can, the cyberspace is amorphous, it is not easy to regulate, and it is not easy for people to throw their muzzles there. So if you have the panache to be able to sell, and you have the network to be able to do that, and the links to be able to do that, then some of these conflicts might be avoided, because most people, if they can get what they want in the comfort of their homes and paying you online without, physical exchange of cash, that marketplace as we used to know it will become diminished, and the source of crisis might also, become lower. That is my own piece of thought. So as we are thinking, even for the Plateau man and the indigenous who want to do business, but most of us who have noticed it, we have a lot of people selling clothes online, selling shoes, selling a lot of things. And for some people now, they've not gone to market to purchase any of these things, because most of the time, those people, them or somebody who knows them. And once it's guaranteed, you get whatever you want in the comfort of your homes. And that issue of struggle over space and how to, do business and maybe getting crisis from time to time may have come to an end. If we follow that amorphous way, go to the cyberspace and cut off the physical, though it will be difficult in the first place, but that is what is happening all over the world. We talk of Amazon, we talk of, not eBay and the rest. These are people, they take, physical things and put it in cyberspace, and there's a big market running into billions of dollars every year. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
I can see Professor Sati raising up his hand. Okay, Henry, after you, please.
Okay, I think Obiora, it's quite interesting, as you pointed out, that these new innovations, and it still brings us to the idea of new innovations. You don't come into the market expecting to just get a share of the access to the space. So if somebody has been selling timber for 50, 60 years, you can't come in this year and say, okay, I want this space. I want to start selling timber. But if you have new ideas, new innovations, you can now build in a concept that will work for you. However, I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that the market itself is not just a commercial space; it's a social concourse. And so, a lot of times, some people want to go to the market because they want to socialize. And so, when we say, "Okay, Amazon is here," let's create our own Amazon. Now we have Konga or we have all of these. We will still want to meet. We will still, in one way or the other, want that human contact. And that is where we will need to learn to merge the two, I guess. Thank you. Sorry, Prof.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me? I'm in a very difficult location.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Obiora, for bringing that perspective, because it appears what the markets we have been dealing with in this conversation is a traditional African market that we know.
Open market.
And so the study is based on that traditional open market that is typically African. But the notion that the market is, you can only come in to buy and you cannot sell. It's the notion of an imperfect market. It's a notion of an oligopoly. It's the notion of a cartel. And free trade thinkers, since the era of the Physiocrats to Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and their successors, have demolished that theory that a market space should be regulated. The only regulator is government. But if you come and you want to create a cartel and you want to prevent others, this is why in the US they call it antitrust law. You cannot come to the space and block others. But you cannot come into the space only also because this is your land. That is not a market theory. So market theories must function with the principles of demand and supply, and not with ethnic entrance, not with religious orientation. So what are you coming to compete with? And if you have the competitive edge, it depends on your marketing strategy. What do you have to sell? And how is it better than the other one that another person is selling? So you have to look very hard. And if that is the way the markets you have studied look like, that you can only come in to buy and not to sell, then you have to develop a theory to explain that kind of market. It is an unusual market. It's not a market that exists and it's not known to other parts of the world. Now, what I like is too that how you are explaining the markets and the interaction of forces in the market from the perspective of multi-causality of causes. Once we reduce understanding of markets or any conflict phenomena to a particular explanation, we will get into the danger of the single story. So the explanations must be as flexible to accommodate new shades of opinion that the research will throw up, rather than fix them in categories that are known and then they become difficult to explain either theoretically or empirically, because there is no one problem that can be explained from a single cause. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you, everyone. I don't think there's anyone with a question, but there's a comment here in the chat section that says, I have thoroughly enjoyed these discussions. Barira and Henry have been super. We must, however, be careful to avoid thinking that correlation indicates causation, even in studies such as this. If you watch a basketball game, you may come to the conclusion that short men are not allowed to play the game. Okay. All right. Any more questions?
I think we just have to round up because of time. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Sorry. I wish to know where Prof is from.
Professor Sati, someone wants to know where
Professor
you're
Sati.
from.
Oh, I am their grandfather.
The institution you teach.
Okay,
let me need the introduction, sir.
University.
I wanted to also answer because he taught me.
Yeah.
Professor Sati is our professor of history. He well, I don't know whether he's just stepped down, but he is the dean of the Faculty of Arts, University of Jos, and he has been well, no student in history from the University of Jos will not pass through Professor Sati. He's a mentor. He's exceptional. You can see what he's still mentoring, even as he is here, and he has been a great inspiration, most especially for me, and I know for a lot of other history students. So this is Professor Sati Fortchak. Welcome, sir.
Another historian saluting you, sir.
Yeah, so Prof Sati, thank you very much for coming. I'm sure you are proud of your students and your mentees. And we are
very, very proud of them.
Yeah, we're proud of all of them. So I want to thank you everyone for coming. It's been 1 hour 47 minutes of an interesting, intense conversation about the marketplace. And I want to invite you again to the next webinar on Publish and Perish, which is an issue for people that are growing for us. And again, the last one within the month will be handled on academic stress. We realize that a lot of people are collapsing and dying, and yet you must publish and perish, you must mark script and all of that. Want to mind how do we maintain balance and yet be productive. So thank you very much for your time. The webinar will be available on the YouTube channel. I'll also send the link to everyone in case you want anybody to listen to this. This has come to stay in Plateau, and from time to time we'll get to one of these days we'll have Prof Sati come around to talk to us. So Prof, I hope when we reach out to you, you would oblige us that opportunity. So thank you very much everyone for coming. Barira, thank you. Mang, thank you very much. I will chat you up later to talk. So thank you everyone and good night.
Thank you.